should be familiar to many of you, sort of in person or, by reputation. That's Andy Worthington here from the UK. He came across the town to be part of this. And then, Andy is a rigorous and indefatigable champion of human rights and one of the most important voices globally about this issue. He probably has the most comprehensive understanding of the detainee population, for the duration of the existence of Guantánamo, and then intimately knows the stories of the people there, their lives before Guantánamo, all of the sort of twists and turns and sort of sad wrangling involved in their cases. And then he continues to be very outspoken in the UK and the United States when he can, advocating for the immediate closure of Guantánamo, justice for the victims and accountability for the torturers. I should say also that he's a man of many talents. He's also an accomplished photographer and is engaged in a current project where every day he bicycles to a different neighborhood in his beloved London and takes photographs. And this is a lovely way to sort of document the urban experience, away from automobiles and so forth. So I just thought I'd mention that. And then the second speaker is Todd Pierce, who for several years was a defendant with the Judge Advocates General's program in the military council at Guantánamo, and then apparently has a 3-for-3 record in terms of getting his clients released, which is very impressive. He's since retired so as to retain his perfect score. Joking aside, he'll give us a set of, I think, very important insights of what all this looks like, from the inside, and a military man loyal to the Constitution trying to, sort of honor his own oath and then serve American justice in an honorable way. So I've asked each of them to speak for about 20 minutes, and then we can have a robust conversation. And the last thing I'll say is that, this is an important evening because we're on the eve of another January 11th, and then we have a tradition going back many years of having people address the group before we commit again to action and witness a bunch of people in this room are risking arrest tomorrow and for potentially a sort of difficult and trying day. And it's really important that we hear from experts and people who care deeply about the issue to strengthen our own resolve for what lies ahead tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being here. I was going to say coming tonight because I usually do events where people turn up, but you've been here for days. And all the work that you do every year is absolutely fantastic, so I'm really, really pleased to be here with you and to be doing my little bit in trying to help as we approach the anniversary tomorrow, the 11th anniversary of this dreadful prison. As I'm sure we all know, this is a position that I'm sure 4 years ago most of us didn't think we would be in, where it's become almost impossible to get people out of Guantánamo. 13 prisoners have been released in the last 2.5 years, I believe, alive. There have, of course, been 3 prisoners who died in that period. And, the prisoners in Guantánamo have been failed by all 3 branches of the United States government, by the Obama administration, by the Congress, and by the courts. To that extent, it couldn't really be worse. But 4 years ago, we had a promise from President Obama that he was going to close it. At that time, we still had prisoners who were being released as a result of having their habeas corpus petitions granted. And I don't know whether I can say anything positive about what Congress's role 4 years ago, because Congress has never played a positive role in Guantánamo as far as I can see throughout its whole history. We are dealing, I think what we're dealing with now that it's important for us all to bear in mind is that President Obama is in his 2nd term. He has won his re-election, which meant that for the whole of last year, nobody was really supposed to talk about Guantánamo because they didn't want to talk about that while they were campaigning and spending those eye-watering amounts of money that are spent in every United States election. Well, that's over, and he won. And now he has these 4 years, and that's the end. Because wisely in the United States, you don't allow presidents to go on forever like we do with our prime ministers. We have occasionally been plagued by prime ministers entering a third term, by which point they are barking mad, or more barking mad than they were in the first place. So, short of him rewriting the Constitution, he is going to be out in 4 years' time. Now, I won't overestimate how much people within the administration, President Obama, him included, know that Guantánamo is wrong, but nor would I try and pretend that a lot of people in the administration don't know. They do know that it is wrong. They do know, and there is a weakness on that, particularly in the case of President Obama, that I think we have to hammer away at. He has a legacy, and we have to tell him that he has a legacy. And his legacy will be that he was the man who promised to close Guantánamo, and then failed to do so because, what, is there any great compelling reason, Mr. Obama? No, there isn't. It was politically inconvenient to fulfill his promise as the President of the United States. That will be what is recorded in the history books. And he needs to be told that, and he needs to be told that repeatedly. And, we need to find ways that we can, however we can, to push on anyone that is connected to the administration in any way to keep hitting on this legacy point. And why is the legacy point important? Is it because in some abstract sense Guantánamo is an abomination? Well, it's always that. It's not even in an abstract sense that Guantánamo is an abomination. Guantánamo remains a place where prisoners are held uniquely without the rights that prisoners in any other circumstances have. Without the rights that prisoners have in domestic prisons who have been tried and sentenced. Without the rights that prisoners have who are prisoners of war, who have the right to be held unmolested until the end of hostilities. No, these are still the illegal enemy combatants conceived by the Bush administration and held for the first 2.5 years of Guantánamo's existence as human beings with no rights whatsoever. For 2.5 years the Bush administration got away with holding people with no rights. And it was only when in June 2004 in Rasul v. Bush, the Supreme Court said, no, actually, and this is going to sound weird, Mr. Bush, but you captured these people in wartime, but you're holding them without any rights. If they say, as many of them do, we were caught by mistake, mistakes were made, what is our avenue of redress? You have left them no avenue of redress. So unusually, Mr. President, we are going to give prisoners granted in wartime habeas corpus rights. That started it. That let the lawyers in. That punctured the true horrific reality of Guantánamo in the first 2.5 years, where the prisoners had no rights, and whatever the government wanted to do to them, it could do. And we all know what they did to the prisoners in that period. We know about the torture program that was introduced. In a horrible kind of tit-for-tat game between the CIA and Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, where Rumsfeld saw the CIA torturing prisoners and wanted some of that himself. Disgusting. The disgusting history of Guantánamo in that period. So, where we are now is that I think that we can exert this pressure backed up not just by the general truth about Guantánamo, which we know, which you all campaign so brilliantly on, because you take this personally, because we have to take this personally as human beings. It isn't happening to us, but we have not forgotten our empathy with other human beings. And sadly, I see far too many people who have forgotten to be able to empathize with people. But it isn't just the general story of Guantánamo, it's the fact that at Guantánamo, over half of those people who are held have been cleared for release by the Obama administration. That the Guantánamo Review Task Force, which was established by President Obama soon after taking office and making his wonderful promise to close Guantánamo, that the Guantánamo Review Task Force, a very sober and serious collection of officials and lawyers from the government departments and from the intelligence agencies who spent a year reviewing the cases of the Guantánamo prisoners, said, we do not want to carry on holding these men for the rest of their lives. They said, of the 86, it was more than that initially, it was 126. In fact, it was 156, I should say. So many people have been released. Just to explain who these people are, there are two categories of prisoner. The task force said that around 55 or 56 of these people that are still held should be released immediately, and that 30 others who were Yemenis should be held in what they described as conditional detention. Now the task force made this up with no reference point to explain to anybody what it was supposed to mean. They said these guys should be held until it is regarded that the security situation in Yemen has improved to the extent that it's safe to release them. They didn't describe a mechanism for how that would be judged. And I think we all know that what happened is that around the time that they issued this report in January 2010, it was ready to go. That was exactly the time that, just after a Nigerian man had tried to blow up a bomb in his underwear on a plane bound for Detroit. It had failed, but he had been captured, and it turned out that he had allegedly been recruited in Yemen, and therefore the call went out for all releases to Yemen to be stopped, and President Obama complied and issued a temporary moratorium in January 2010, which is in place now. 3 years later, it's still in place. One Yemeni has been released as a result in the intervening years. So all of these Yemenis are still held, the 30 in conditional detention, the rest of them, the 27 or 28 others, were essentially added to the conditional detention. At some point in the future, in a future that will never come, somebody somewhere, by a mechanism that doesn't even exist, will decide that it is safe to resume the transfer of cleared prisoners to Yemen from Guantánamo. That's a disgrace. That has been, from the moment that President Obama agreed to it, a decision that it was fair for the United States government to hold people on the basis that although they were cleared for release, they were guilty because of their very nationality. It's disgusting. In previous visits, you know, I've explained that this and one of the obstacles to the release of prisoners that was put in place by Congress, that they will not allow the president to release any prisoner to a country where they allege that a single released prisoner is engaged in recidivism, returning to the battlefield. My analogy for that was to say, so imagine within the United States that a prisoner is released from a prison in California and he goes out and commits a crime. And then Congress gets together and says, in light of the solitary prisoner who was released from California and committed a crime, we hereby declare that no prisoners from California will ever be released from the United States domestic prison system again. Now that's what the Congress has set up for prisoners from Guantánamo on the basis of their nationality, and that President Obama has done in the case of the Yemenis. So how unacceptable does that sound in a domestic context? Well, I'm sure that you know that that sounds completely unacceptable, and that only the most lunatic right-wing people in this country would agree that, you know, it's better never to release anyone from prison under any circumstances because of what they might do. I don't know how to tell you how we can campaign on this, except to say that I think people in general, in the whole community involved in trying to close Guantánamo, have been much too silent on this. Have been saying it's a really difficult issue, the Yemen one. It's not a really difficult issue, the Yemen one. These are people who were cleared for release. These are people who have been condemned to indefinite detention and death in Guantánamo on the basis of their nationality alone. President Obama's, one of President Obama said it was a no-brainer after this failed underwear bomb plot when he imposed this moratorium on releasing Yemenis. I would say it's a no-brainer that we have to repeatedly and in every way possible say, you are not holding these people for anything they've done, you're holding them on the basis of their nationality alone. That is disgraceful. You know, the bigger picture about clearing people for release and not releasing them is, that's worse than what the most horrible totalitarian regime, the most horrible dictatorship does. You know, when those people throw people in prison for life and throw away the key, they don't say, oh, by the way, we've established a task force that is involved in designating people for release or not. We've actually cleared you for release, but we're not going to release you. They don't do that, because that's unspeakably cruel. The honesty of a brutal dictatorship is something that's missing from the behavior of the United States government at this time. That they would say to people, we clear you for release, and then not release them. So we have the Yemenis, and the other people that I would offer for your consideration are the other cleared prisoners. The people who are from countries where the majority of them can't be returned safely. There are still a few of the Uyghurs. These are Muslims from a province in China who are persecuted by the Chinese government. There are Syrians in Guantánamo who have been cleared for release. there are other people from other countries that it's not safe to go home to. There are also 5 Tunisians who've been cleared for release. I can't see why we can't more actively campaign for these people, because they were all captured because they left their home country because they were opposed to the rule of the dictator Ben Ali, who was booted out of Tunisia. So it is safe for them to return home. And there is Shaka Arma, who I'm sure many of you have heard of and know of, the last British resident in the prison. And it is inexplicable that he is still held because the United States government doesn't want to carry on holding him. He is one of the 55 people on the list that was released by the Justice Department in September, the 55 people that are officially cleared for release of the 86. The British government has said that they want him back. Why is he still held? Well, he's still held because he knows too much. He's an articulate and passionate man who has persistently defended the rights of the prisoners to be treated as human beings. He knows a lot. He will embarrass both the British and American governments when he is released. So it's not happening. He is the only prisoner who could be released tomorrow without the president having to jump through any hoops, because Congress has only decided that he can't release people to countries that they regard as dangerous, and that is not Britain. I mean, I'm sure that you can think of some of the most rabid of your elected representatives who would try and claim that the United Kingdom is a terrorist country, but most people, I think, would laugh them out of the building for that one. We have tried in Britain to push his case, and I can only encourage you to carry on trying to push his case here as well. You know, as we all know, sadly, the big driver that we need is to have more people who care about issues. So what I'm really trying to do this year is just throw out some pointers for things that we can campaign on. So, you know, the Yemeni issue is very dear to me. These are human beings who have been, you know, just cast into indefinite detention, probably for the rest of their lives because of where they're born. So, you know, we need to work on establishing that they're human beings, because the hysteria that has prevailed for the last 3 years in the case of the Yemenis would suggest, I think, that all of these people can't wait to be freed, because the moment they're freed, they're going to engage in some kind of heinous activity. You know, it is absurd for anyone anywhere to be claiming that any of these people just can't wait to be getting hold of a jumbo jet so they can fly it into a tall building. These are people who were utterly insignificant people when they were captured in Afghanistan or in Pakistan. There are none of these people who were above the level of a very simple foot soldier for the Taliban in an inter-Muslim civil war with the Northern Alliance, if they were there. And many of them were not there. Many of them were humanitarian aid workers or missionaries, and they joined a lot of the other people who are still there, who were refugees or economic migrants. So those are those issues. You know, behind these are the other issues that we have to deal with, which is that, you know, through an executive order that President Obama signed in March 2011, there are 46 prisoners who are held at Guantánamo indefinitely without charge or trial. You know, that's what he wrote that in his executive order, that he was holding them on that basis. I mean, the fact is that these days everyone is held indefinitely without charge or trial for the rest of their lives, but these specifically were designated as such. The task force recommended it. Obama approved it. He said there would be a review process to establish you know, whether it was possible for these people to be put forward for release. And as we heard, I don't know whether you've seen this, but there was a story last week reporting that no review process has been established. So these men are just left there to rot. And the designation by executive order of people who can be indefinitely detained without charge or trial with this nominal review process, that really absolutely is the low point in the detention policies of the Bush administration being continued by the Obama administration. You know, he tried to hedge that in so that it only applied to the specific group of people. But this is an absolute definition by the President of the United States that there is a category of people that happen to be at Guantánamo who are so dangerous that they have to be held without charge or trial for the rest of their lives, even though they acknowledged while doing this, the president had to acknowledge while doing this, that there is insufficient evidence to put them on trial. You know, it doesn't get more disgusting than that. This is what Bush did. This is people who, I'm sorry, Mr. President, but apparently you studied law. You don't understand that if you haven't got enough evidence to put them on trial, that means you haven't got the evidence. It's not evidence. It's something else. And we know from the story of Guantánamo what that is. That is false statements made by prisoners who were tortured or otherwise coerced or bribed or just pushed until they broke and said, look, what do you want me to tell you? I'm going to tell you what you want me to tell you. It's lies, but I'll tell you because they will get you off my back. Which so many people did. So, you know, we have these 46, and we should not forget those people, but we have to campaign on the President honouring a promise to close Guantánamo, and very specifically because of these 86 men who have been cleared for release and are still held. That is totally unforgivable. And the only other group of people that we should think about, of course, are the other prisoners who are designated for trial, and only a handful of those have ever been put forward for trial, and those trials are proceeding very slowly. And well, Todd will be able to, if I ever shut up, tell you something about those because of his very important first-hand experience of those cases. And you know, and I know that all the people gathered in this room care about everybody at Guantánamo who has been denied the rights that should be afforded to all prisoners. Even those handful of men in Guantánamo who are accused of heinous crimes have not been treated the way that people deprived of their liberty should be treated. So you know, we're thinking of everybody, but if we can in this coming year, from tomorrow, from tonight, think of how we can start to publicise the particular horrors of the way that the Yemenis are treated. And think of Adnan Latif, who died in Guantánamo in September, who was cleared for release and died at least 6 years and maybe 8 years after he was first told that they didn't want to hold him anymore. Who is a Yemeni, who couldn't be released because he's a Yemeni. You know, that's what we really need to take forward, and we need to take that in every way possible to the United States government, along with the permanent message to President Obama. The clock is ticking, Mr. President. You will be judged on what you do or don't do in this second term. This is your last chance to be a decent man. So, thank you again all for being here and for all that you do. Thank you very much.